dedication to our nation's Air Force and Space Force. I look forward to, as all of us will, discussing your fiscal year 2025 budget priorities. General Alvin, I believe this is your first hearing before this subcommittee. Welcome. We're always interested to hear your perspective coming into this hearing, and so we look forward to working with all of you to get the FY2025 budget request for the Department of Air Force, which is roughly 258.5, about $5 billion or 2% above last year's budget, passed. I say last year's budget, but as you well know, unfortunately, it's only 3 weeks old. I think that is ineptness on Congress's part, not on yours, and we tend to tie your hands behind your back when we don't get budgets done on time. I know that Senator Collins and Senator Murray want to get a budget done on time. Unfortunately, there's far too many people here who believe that government shutdowns are the way this place should work, and it is not. And I look forward to working with Senator Collins and everybody else on this subcommittee to get you guys a budget on time that is as robust as we possibly can get. At last year's Department of Air Force hearing, I stressed the importance of getting that budget done on time. We failed. But we don't need to fail this year. We need to get it done and get it done by the end of September so you guys have the certainty that you need not to waste taxpayer dollars and make sure that the folks that serve under you have every tool necessary to be successful. I commend Senators Murray, Senator Collins for working hard to get that 2024 bill across the finish line. But the fact of the matter is our airmen and guardians deserve better, and we can do better. Timely enactment of a defense appropriation bill has never been more urgent. China's intentions regarding Taiwan, coupled with its advancements in military modernization, Russia's unjust war in Ukraine, and the escalation in the Middle East are just a few examples of global security environment that require continued diligence and modernization of critical weapon systems to effectively deter violence and defend ourselves and our allies. Continuing resolutions, government shutdowns, without accurate appropriations, it hamstrings our national defense. Our airmen and guardians don't receive the training they need to get their job done. We can't get rid of outdated equipment. We can't modernize. We can't field new systems at scale. So, notwithstanding political headwinds and budget constraints, we're going to continue to work to end this trend, disastrous trend, I might add, of CRs and uncertainty, and get us back onto a regular budget cycle. The volatile global security environment has driven a great sense of urgency to the DoD's attempt to field innovative technologies and solutions at scale as quickly as possible. We're always open to working with the Department of Defense to ensure that our warfighter has the tools they need to be effective, and we encourage the DoD to continue to take advantage of the current rapid acquisition and prototyping authorities, as well as funding flexibilities to get this job done. However, it cannot be ignored that programs initiated with expedited acquisition authorities apparently suffer from the same cost, schedule, and technical issues as traditional acquisition programs do. The Air Force in particular has struggled to mature and transition into significant production, several so-called rapid acquisition programs, including the E-7 Wedgetail and the Aero hypersonic weapon. Further, I'm concerned that many prototyping programs initiated with much urgencies are not fully funded in the budget. This does not send the right message. So before we entertain enacting new budget and acquisition authorities, I do want to understand how the Air Force is going to improve its performance to ensure that capabilities we invest in actually reach the hands of the warfighter without wasting taxpayer dollars. There is no question that the Air Force must keep pace with evolving threats by modernizing, fielding new capabilities, and procuring systems that outperform our enemy. It is the role of Congress to ensure the American taxpayer dollars are used in the most effective way possible to achieve superiority. And I look forward to continuing to work with you folks and others to make that possible. Once again, I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank you for what you do to keep this country safe. And with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Collins for her remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Tester, for holding this hearing. And a warm welcome to our newest member who I just saw in the hallway, Senator Chris Coons. I know he stopped by prior to the hearing to greet our witnesses. To our witnesses, thank you for your service, and please relay to the airmen and guardians that serve with you how much we appreciate their service to our country. I want to expand just for a moment on the comments that the chairman made about the importance of the appropriations process proceeding on time. Our committee worked very hard last year and did, in fact, report each and every one of the appropriations bills, including the defense appropriations bills, prior to the end of July. Unfortunately, we then ran into roadblocks in getting the bills brought to the Senate floor. I would note that while the bill was passed far too late, we did avoid having a continuing resolution. That was advocated by some of our colleagues. It would have been an absolute disaster for our Department of Defense. And I thank the Secretary for spelling out in a letter what the disastrous consequences of a year-long continuing resolution would have been. So we were far too late as an institution in completing our bills, but at least we avoided that outcome. I would also note that it does not help the process that the president is late by a month in submitting his budget. There is a legal requirement for the budget to be submitted. I believe it's the first Monday in February, and that deadline was not met again this year. Let me offer a few other observations as we begin this important hearing. First of all, none of us can gloss over the fact that this budget request would result in a real decrease in funding available for the Air Force and Space Force to buy aircraft and weapons. That's true for the other military services as well. Just to keep pace with inflation for critical needs like military pay, healthcare, and housing, the top line would need to be higher by at least 4%, but the administration proposes a top line increase of less than 2% for the Air Force. To comply with the caps of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the 2025 budget request for the Air Force is $2 billion less than was planned when Secretary Kendall and General Saltzman testified before the committee just last year. Second, our witnesses need to be completely forthright, as I know you will be and always are, in describing to the committee the risks the Air Force would be accepting with this budget request. For example, Air Force officials have said that at any one time, 514 aircraft in the fleet are grounded due to a lack of spare parts. Funding for additional spares to reduce that deficiency significantly was excluded from the budget request and instead has been included on the services unfunded requirements list. What are the consequences if Congress does not restore this $2 billion reduction? What risks are we assuming, given that China's Air Force continues to grow and this budget request proposes a net reduction of 129 aircraft? That means a much smaller Air Force. Each budget request must account for both the threats we're facing now and that are projected into the future. What I know with certainty is that the threats facing our country and our military are growing. Two combatant commanders in the last few months have told me that this is the most dangerous global environment in 50 years. Third, Unless the National Security Supplemental is enacted into law, and soon, the Air Force will have to take funding out of HIDE from the fiscal year 2024 Defense Appropriations Bill we just enacted to sustain the airmen and guardians deployed in support of our allies and partners confronting adversaries in Europe and in the Middle East. The bipartisan National Security Supplemental passed by the Senate in February included more than $1.8 billion for these purposes. Without this supplemental funding, there will be even greater harm to overall readiness and modernization. Finally, I would note that many of the military aircraft transporting aid to Ukraine and Israel are supported by the 101st Air Refueling Wing in Bangor, Maine, of which I am very proud. Secretary Kendall, I know they're very eager to host you, and I look forward to doing so as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Collins. Appreciate your remarks. We'll now start with the panel. Secretary Kendall, you are up. Your full written testimony will be a part of the record. If you can keep it close to 5, we'd appreciate it, but take your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Tester, Vice Chair Collins, members of the subcommittee. General Saltzman, General Alvin, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Department of the Air Force's FY25 budget submission. The DAF FY25 budget request supports the National Defense Strategy. We appreciate the committee's support for the recently enacted FY24 budget and your efforts to secure timely passage. As you are aware, the 6-month delay has had a real impact. That time cannot be recovered, but at least we can now move forward with our urgent modernization priorities. As I have testified before this committee repeatedly, time is my greatest concern. We are in a race for military technological superiority with a capable pacing challenge. Our cushion is gone. We are out of time. As we have briefed the committee at a classified level, the pacing threat moves steadily forward. Continued failure to provide on-time authorities and appropriations, as you both noted, will leave the Air Force and Space Force inadequately prepared. We know the committee recognizes this, and we appreciate your strong bipartisan support. Our FY25 budget request complies with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We are requesting $217.5 billion for the Department of the Air Force, which includes $188 billion for the Air Force and $29.4 billion for the Space Force. The FY25 budget reflects an increase of about 1.5%, as you noted, less than inflation, Vice Chairman, over the enacted FY24 budget, and does not keep pace with inflation or with the 7% publicly acknowledged growth of China's military budget. To stay within the levels of the FRA, the DAF had to adjust our previous plans. The DAF FY25 budget request seeks to preserve the momentum behind our modernization efforts, particularly the work on operational imperatives that we initiated and that this committee supported in FY24. In order to preserve modernization, we have marginally reduced procurement, and we have sustained our foundational accounts at levels we deemed acceptable, but no more. Because the Space Force budget is dominated by research and development accounts, we have had to marginally reduce the pace and scope of our Space Force modernization programs. Our first priority in the National Defense Strategy remains defense of the homeland. The DAF primarily supports through investments in domain awareness, air and space defense, early warning, and cyberspace defense programs. Our second NDS priority is to deter strategic attacks against the United States, our allies, and our partners. The DAF FY25 budget request prioritizes nuclear modernization to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. Notably, the Sentinel ICBM program has experienced unacceptable cost and schedule increases and is currently undergoing a Nunn-McCurdy review. The Department of the Air Force will work closely with the committee as that review reaches its conclusions. The third National Defense Strategy priority is to deter aggression and be prepared to prevail in conflict when necessary. The DAF needs immediate and significant capability modernization to keep pace with the growing military capabilities of the PRC. The DAF operational imperatives and the closely related cross-cutting operational enablers continue to guide modernization. The FY25 Defense DAF budget request includes $6.1 billion for these efforts. Finally, the fourth National Defense Strategy priority is to build a resilient joint force and enduring advantages. This budget request invests to ensure that we can recruit and retain the force we need, and so that our airmen and guardians and their families have the quality of life they deserve and can serve to their full potential. As we have briefed the committee, the DAF is also currently undertaking a department-wide effort to re-optimize to meet the demands of great power competition. The intent is to minimize both cost impacts and personnel or unit movements. We will work closely with the committee as we develop detailed plans. We do not anticipate any significant impact on the FY25 budget, and we have not requested funds for this purpose. The DAF also deeply appreciates the committee's support for the DoD Quick Start initiative that was enacted last year by the authorizers. The DAF has obtained approval from the Secretary for 2 programs that will be initiated under this new authority. We are in the process of providing the required formal notification to the Congress and will publicly announce the 2 programs shortly. Time matters, but so do resources. The United States is facing a competitor with national purchasing power that exceeds our own, a challenge we have never faced in modern times. China is actively developing and expanding capabilities to challenge strategic stability, attack our critical space systems, and defeat our ability to protect power, especially air power. Conflict is not inevitable, but it could happen at any time. General Alvin and I just returned from a trip to some of our key bases in the Indo-Pacific. We should all be very proud of our men and women serving in harm's way and doing everything they can to deter and be ready for a conflict should that occur. The DAF FY25 budget request is focused on addressing these realities and these needs. We commit to working with the committee to secure timely enactment of this budget request, and we thank you for your support in that endeavor. Thank you. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Kendall. We appreciate your statement. Now we'll turn to the Space Force. General Saltzman, you're up.
Senator Tester, Ranking Member Collins, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for your continued support and for the opportunity to testify on the Space Force's posture for FY25. As the Space Force prepares to celebrate its 5th birthday, we are wholly dedicated to the work of forging a service purpose-built for great power competition. Space has never been more critical to the security of our nation, and the success or failure of the joint force depends heavily upon the capabilities we present. It is our responsibility to contest and control the domain, to defend U.S. space capabilities, and to protect the joint force from space-enabled attack. Gaining and maintaining space superiority is the purpose for which the Space Force was established. With about 3% of the Department of Defense budget, the Space Force offers a tremendous value proposition to the nation. Every dollar invested in space brings asymmetric returns, but that means every dollar cut creates asymmetric risk. Against a near-peer adversary, space superiority is the linchpin. Without it, we cannot deter conflict. Without it, we cannot provide vital effects. Without it, we cannot protect the joint force. Until we have built the infrastructure to achieve space superiority, the Space Force is a work in progress. The Space Force's theory of success includes 3 parts: avoiding operational surprise, denying the benefits of attack in space, and conducting responsible counterspace activities. The Space Force budget request is designed to support the national defense strategy by building, training, and equipping the forces the nation needs to perform each activity, preserving freedom of action in space while deterring and denying adversarial objectives. Avoiding operational surprise requires us to maintain an accurate understanding of the space domain at all times. 8.3% of our budget is dedicated to this aim. Operating across disaggregated sensor frameworks, the Space Force provides the maximum information possible to decision makers from the tactical to the strategic level. And denying the benefits of attack in space demands that we make any attack against U.S. capabilities impractical and self-defeating. 43.4% of our budget is devoted to this objective, investing in resiliency for missile warning and tracking, satellite communications, position, navigation, and timing. Hybrid architectures and proliferated constellations impose a heavy cost on aggression. Finally, responsible counterspace activities describes the mechanism by which the Space Force contests and controls the space domain. The FY25 budget dedicates 24.7% of the Space Force budget to space superiority. Within the constraints of the FRA, the FY25 Space Force budget reflects hard choices to maintain legacy space services and preserve current readiness, but it also slows the fielding of a modernized force. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Space Force's FY25 budget and posture. Even in the face of accelerating threats, the Space Force remains the preeminent military space organization in the world. With the support of this committee, our guardians will preserve and expand our strategic advantage, and we will step up to meet our pacing challenge. So long as you continue to trust and invest in your space service, the Space Force will respond with unparalleled value for the nation. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Saltzman. Next, we'll hear from Air Force General Alvin. I'm sorry.
I think I got this right. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Tester, Vice Chair Collins, and distinguished members of this committee. Today, I'm proud to represent the 677,000 total force airmen serving our nation. I want to thank you for your unyielding support, not only for those airmen, but for their families as well. It's an honor to sit beside Secretary Kendall and General Saltzman today and testify on the fiscal year 25 budget submission. As we look across the strategic landscape, we find ourselves in a time of significant consequence. The simultaneous demands of strategic competition with an aggressive and increasingly capable PRC and persistent, acute threats from around the globe require the Air Force to maximize the readiness of today's forces while adapting our structures and processes to offer the best opportunity to prevail in an environment of enduring great power competition. Time is not on our side. The FY25 Air Force budget request reflects difficult choices. We've made trade-offs to keep the Air Force's operational readiness today at the minimum acceptable to meet the nation's demands, while seeking to preserve the previous year's advances in modernization. The Air Force budget request also invests in the Air Force's most precious asset, our airmen, to ensure they remain the decisive advantage upon which our nation depends. Strategic deterrence is a key priority in our national defense strategy, and the U.S. Air Force remains committed to the recapitalization of our nuclear force. We are actively supporting the process triggered by the Nunn-McCurdy breach of the Sentinel program and will continue to pursue the path of a safe, secure, reliable, and effective ground leg of the nuclear triad well into the future. The B-21 will form the backbone of the Air Force's future bomber force, capable of executing both conventional and nuclear missions, and remains a key investment priority for the FY25 budget. Our ability to support the National Defense Strategy priority of deterring aggression and prevailing in conflict demands a modern Air Force that is connected to the Joint Force and can close multiple kill chains in minimal time to control the tempo of a complex fight with a peer competitor. To that end, the FY25 budget proposes continued investments in the F-35 and F-15EX, albeit with fewer than preferred quantities dictated by the constraints of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We continue our investment in the Advanced Battle Management System that will provide cutting-edge tools and an integrated digital architecture to enable C3 battle management in contested and degraded environments. We remain committed to the Next Generation Air Dominance family of systems, particularly collaborative combat aircraft, which will allow Air Force to deliver the affordable mass required to be effective against a very capable PRC. We're also committed to building forward basing resilient enough to enable continued sortie generation, even while under attack. This imperative became even more apparent to Secretary Kendall and I as we traveled through the Indo-Pacific. To arrest the decline in our readiness, we have proposed modest increase in investment in flying hours and weapon system sustainment to support them, while prioritizing investments in critical physical and cyber infrastructure. Our airmen are and always will be the deciding factor in any conflict our Air Force faces, and we are committed to their health, development, and quality of life. We have made significant progress thanks to Congress's support to increase basic pay, adjust basic allowance for housing and subsistence to account for macroeconomic factors. There is still work to be done. During our recent trip, the Secretary and I saw dedicated airmen eager to accomplish the mission, despite significant challenges such as infrastructure degradation caused by natural disaster and persistent environmental challenges, as well as access to health care enjoyed by most CONUS bases. Efforts in lowering barriers to service and increasing targeting tools are driving a trend in the right direction for recruiting and retention. To continue to attract and retain the very best in critical skills, we are developing tracks for officers and enlisted airmen in the technical area, and we are creating new warrant officer billets in cyber and IT. The job of your Air Force has not changed since its inception. Support the defense of this nation through credible deterrence and unmatched combat prowess. To preserve that level of deterrence, we must maintain our readiness today, modernize our force for tomorrow, and provide the absolute best support to our airmen. Success on any battlefield is a team effort. I want to thank the members of Congress and this committee for their past and continued support. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
General Alvin, thank you very much for your statement, and I want to thank you all for your statements. I want to express a couple things before I get to my questions. Number one, This budget puts a lot of pressure on you three gentlemen and the other branches of our military to make sure that our priorities are correct. That being said, we are living under a 1% increase budget cap that was negotiated in a bipartisan way by leadership. I don't think Senator Collins and I are going to be in conflict with this statement at all. I think this is totally inadequate. I think we've got to figure out a way to make sure at this dangerous time, which I believe is the most dangerous time in the world since the early 1960s, that we give you the money you need and then hold you accountable to make sure you spend it correctly. But I'm here to tell you that from this senator's perspective, the amount that's in this budget, and I don't care if we're talking about Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, it doesn't matter, is inadequate. And I think it's inadequate because there was a decision made to put a 1% cap down months ago that was a bad decision. That being said, we will work with you and we will work in a bipartisan way to try to make sure that you have what you need for that deterrence and those priorities that you've already spoke of. I want to start by talking about recruiting. End strength for the Air Force in this budget holds us steady at 320,000. It's always been a challenge. It's a challenge right now to meet that number. The question I have is how confident are you, Secretary Kendall, that you'll be able to meet that number? And do you have enough people to, if you don't meet that number, do you have enough people to actually implement the modernization efforts?
Recruiting was a question.
Yes.
We're actually doing very well this year. The active force is on track at this point to essentially meet its goals. In fact, we're looking at revising the goals up slightly. The reserves are doing well also. The Guard has improved their performance over last year, but is not quite meeting their targets. So we took a number of steps. General Alvin led a group, a task force that, when he was the Vice Chair, Chief of Staff, that changed some of our policies to expand the envelope of the people that we would bring in. We did not lower our standards, but we made some adjustments. That helped a lot. We increased our efforts in recruiting in general. We provided better information technology, so our recruiters could be out recruiting instead of at their computers. And we increased the size of the force. We also asked throughout the force people to go interact more. The biggest problem we have with recruiting is the propensity to serve in the U.S. has declined. And a lot of that is lack of familiarity with the military. So we've taken a number of steps to try to reach out and communicate what the opportunities are in the military. So I'm very comfortable with the trajectory as it exists now. I think we're in good shape, as I said, for the active and the reserves, and I think we're making good progress on the Guard. The Space Force has not had an issue with recruiting. General Alvin may want to add a little bit to that.
No, I think the Secretary has it exactly right. We're never satisfied because we know it can turn on a dime. And so in addition to all those that the Secretary has mentioned, we're really reinforcing sort of the value proposition, the sense of purpose, and this idea that we are in a time of consequence, and just reinforcing that there is broader purpose in serving in the military, and that familiarity with what we do. I think it's reaching out to more people, and we're starting to resonate as well.
The Sentinel project is a project that's near and dear to both Senator Hoeven and me. There's about $3.7 billion is allocated to Sentinel, and this is to replace the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile. There have been cost increases and schedule delays. And quite frankly, I believe the Air Force is going to make a decision on the path forward in June. But quite frankly, we're running against, in my perspective, running against some real-time issues if we're going to get these replaced in the 3 ICBM bases by 2036. I know that you were recused from this, Secretary Kendall, so I will go with General Alvin with the question. How committed is the Air Force to replacing Minuteman III? Do you believe that you have, do you believe the Air Force has the folks in position to manage this program? And do you think we'll be able to get it done on time? That time being 2036.
Well, Senator, as you know, we have to recapitalize. We have to ensure that we have a robust and effective triad. And of course, the ICBM leg of that triad is the most responsive, and that has a great deterrence effect. So we will remain committed to the recapitalization. And as we look at the Nunn-McCurdy process playing out. We are supporting that, and we are continuing our engineering and manufacturing development as that occurs. But regardless of what the decision is in July, we remain committed to ensuring that recapitalization in whatever form that takes. The Office of Secretary of Defense has the overall decision authority. We're supporting that with facts and data, but we're certainly committed to ensure that regardless of what the outcome of that committee, we will ensure we have a safe and reliable and effective triad in the future.
Well, I think it's critically important. I just think it's critically important, and I think that if we don't get a good, solid timeline about when things are going to happen, and I anticipate that's going to happen in June, then we can anticipate that we'll never hit that 2036 mark.
And I will add to that, if I could, Senator, that we have internally, we have ensured that we're having leadership. Part of the reevaluation that we've done within the Air Force is we have elevating to a two-star general the Program Executive Office for ICBMs, and ensuring that we can continue to provide the focus and the overall guidance that's needed to support whatever decision that comes out of the Nunn-McCurdy review.
I have some additional questions, but there will be a second round, at least for me. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Alvin, I want to read to you a quote from the Executive Vice President of the Air Force Association. He said the following: under this budget, the Air Force, already the oldest and smallest in its history, would see its total aircraft inventory fall below 5,000 for the first time ever. And indeed, when I looked at the chart on aircraft inventory, the projection is 4,903 aircraft. China, on the other hand, is increasing the size of its fleet of aircraft. Are we at the point where we are risking an Air Force that is too small to accomplish the missions that it is assigned?
Senator, I believe that the most important thing that we should be focused on is having the right capability. Of course, we are all restricted by the budgets within which we work. However, our focus is to ensure that by just having a quantity, we have the right quality to be able to ensure the survivability and the ability to compete in a highly contested environment. So we are focused on getting the maximum capacity that we can of the most capable platforms and systems, because it's gone beyond just counting aircraft. It is the entire kill chain, the ability to have the battle management, to have the situational awareness, which is increasingly we're going to rely on my brother from space here to ensure that we do. So it's really not just platforms, it's a capable system of systems that will ensure that we can endure.
As I listened to you, I remember an admiral saying to me in my very first year in the Senate that quantity has a quality all of its own. I mean, there becomes a point when I look at the 5-year plan of the Air Force, when you're seeking to divest more than 1,000 aircraft while procuring fewer than 1 aircraft for every 2 jets that are being retired. And when I look at the situation in Ukraine, it seems clear to me that not only is quality obviously extremely important and capability, but quantity matters also, particularly when we're facing as many threats in such diverse places as we are.
Senator, I would agree with you, and I would say that quantity does matter, but we want every one of that quantity to be survivable, because if we have a large quantity but they have a reduced chance of survival, then we're actually putting more airmen in harm's way and at higher risk if we can't have them survive and be able to actually prevail. And so we do look at that capability and capacity, but we certainly don't want, because our airmen will go fight. We wanted to deter, but when asked, we'll fight in whatever cockpits we have. And so we want to ensure that when we're providing that mass is actually survivable and can endure.
I just want to make sure you have enough of those cockpits. For each of our witnesses, but starting with the Secretary, please describe to the committee the area or capability where you feel you are incurring the most risk given the top-line constraints.
As I mentioned in my opening statement, my greatest concern is time. and the pace of modernization. China is, and I've been watching China closely since 2010, they have modernized in a way which is intended to take advantage of what they see as our vulnerabilities. And so they are attacking things like our airfields, our carriers, our satellites that we rely upon in relatively small numbers. They're also modernizing in the air domain and in the counter space domain very effectively in general. And they are fielding quantities. We do have to respond to the quantities, as you mentioned. Unfortunately, holding on to increasingly aging and expensive to maintain and less cost-effective assets really doesn't help us with that equation. So when I look at the risk equation, I think we're at a situation where in the near term, the immediate term, we are at an acceptable level of risk, and we have to emphasize getting to the next round of the next generation, if you will, of capabilities. As General Saltzman mentioned, we have got to have a transformative set of space capabilities. We need to get to that. In the air domain, we need to get to the next generation, particularly the uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft that General Alvin mentioned. We have a cost problem with the aircraft that we're buying now. Our fighters are very expensive. The F-35 and the F-15EX cost about $100 million each. NGAD will cost over $300 million, and will be bought in small numbers. The uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft give us an opportunity to address the cost and the quantity issues with relatively inexpensive but very highly cost-effective platforms that we add to the fleet. So getting on with the next generation capabilities is by far my highest priority right now. The risk is increasing over time, and if we focus on the risk today at the expense of that higher levels of risk we're going to see as China continues to modernize, we're going to be in a very untractable position within just a few years.
Thank you. I'll ask the other two to respond for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Kendall and Generals Alvin and Saltzman for your service to the country. Secretary Kendall, I want to especially thank you for coming to the Pease Air National Guard base last year. We really appreciated your announcing the department's policy, increasing transparency for those communities like Portsmouth that have been affected by PFAS contamination. I wonder if you can share an update on the implementation of the new policy, because I'm still hearing concerns from residents in Portsmouth who feel like they're not seeing the kind of transparency they had hoped for as the result of the new policy.
Senator Sheen, thank you. It was a pleasure to meet with you and visit with you at Pease. And as the Vice Chairman mentioned earlier, I'm going to be going to Bangor very shortly, so I'll make sure I've got this balanced here.
You can stop on the way to Bangor. You know, we're right on the route.
Could definitely do that. That program is moving forward, and I think we're committed to doing the right thing in regard to addressing PFAS. We're reacting to the change in standard, and I think at this phase we're doing the planning for the next round. I think there has to be a reassessment given that the standard is tighter than originally expected. So let me take that for the record and get back to you with a more detailed answer. But we share your concern about that problem.
Well, thank you. My constituents will especially appreciate that. Also, the Air Force submitted a proposal to the Armed Services Committee to move assets out of the Air Guard into the active duty Space Force. And while I understand how important that is to the Space Force, we're hearing some concerns from the Guard about what this means and whether it's a precedent for moving other missions out of the Guard. So can you speak to that, and maybe General Saltzman as well could talk about the intent behind the authority and what you hope to use it for?
Now, we have in the process of preparing a report for the Congress on this, and I think it's been briefed already to some of the members. There are roughly 700 people that are affected by this that are currently are designated as Space Force missions or Space Force people serving in the Air National Guard. And we need to resolve their status. It's awkward, the current arrangement. We've made it work for almost over 4 years now, and we can continue to make it work, but it's not ideal by any means. Our preference would be to have those people become members of the Space Force and transition as the reserve people that are part of the Space Force are under the new statute that was passed last year. We intend stability in general for these people. Their units will still exist. They will still serve with basically the same conditions of part-time and full-time and so on, and have the same benefits and everything else, but they will become part of the Space Force. The other alternative is the creation of a space guard. We are definitely not in favor of that. It's too small a number of people to create a large separate institution. I think it's better for them, it's better for the Space Force certainly, if we simply move them into the Space Force as the reserves are going to be moving in. So we value those people, but we want to get this resolved.
So you don't
Been
see
out there
this,
for several years, we need to get it resolved.
and I appreciate that, and you don't see this as a precedent for moving other missions out of the Guard. This is
Absolutely.
not
No,
a blueprint to start doing that.
no, this is an artifact of the creation of the Space Force. It's one of the things, it's sort of cleaning up the battlefield of the creation of the Space Force, doing what makes sense and logical for this people. It's the legal term is sui generis. It's a unique situation. There's absolutely no intention to make any other changes to moving things out of the Guard.
Thank you. General Salzman, Starlink and other commercial satellite ventures are a complement to our operations in space, but I, and I'm sure others, were troubled by the reported incident of SpaceX shutting off its service to the Ukrainian Armed Forces. So can you talk about how we should be addressing that kind of situation with commercial services?
Yes, Senator. I think the best way to answer that question is just to say we do this in a number of different fields for a number of different missions, and we do it contractually. And so we have many contracts where we are counting on commercial service providers to be integrated into our operations. And we have always had good success in making sure that throughout the spectrum of conflict, from time of peace through crisis and even into conflict, that those providers understand what the services is and what they're expected to do across that spectrum of conflict. And so bottom line is when we have contracts to support our military operations, those companies come through.
And so how does Space Force then respond if there are risks involved and they don't come through?
Well, I imagine that would be through the legal ramifications of reversing a contract that you've signed. So we also look very carefully at which companies we're asking for what services to provide. We're very deliberate with making sure that we account for what parts of our missions should be inherently governmental functions performed by members of the Space Force, which ones we feel like can be augmented successfully by commercial services. We're very deliberate with that process as we include them in. And so we would hold them accountable to those contracts the way you would any legal framework.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I get Senator Moran, I would just say that by the time it gets to the courts, it's too late if they've done something that puts us at risk. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Thank you to all of you for your service to the country. Thanks for being present with us this morning. Secretary Kendall, the B-21 Raider program. Let me ask 3 questions on that topic altogether. I'm going to try to get to 4 different topics in my time. As the B-21 program transitions into production, is there anything that this committee should consider to ensure the industrial base is prepared to support the production ramp and fielding meet the warfighter's needs? Are there additional milestones or accomplishments that over the next year or so that you can share in that regard with the B-21 and the Strategic Posture Committee report? Anything that is included in there that the Air Force intends to incorporate into the B-21 program?
I hesitate to say positive things about programs because B-21 is still in development and it could get in trouble at any time. But at this point, the program is making good progress. It's flying. I think that's public. It's classified, so I can't give you many details here. I would point out that the production numbers that are reflected in our budget for this year show a decrease in unit cost because we've been able to negotiate lower prices with the contractor. So it's one example of where we're going in the right direction in our contracting activities and our negotiations. We can get back to you in a classified environment, Senator Moran, and give you more details about specific milestones, but we're watching all that very closely. And at this point, at least, the program is executing fairly well.
Thank you, and I would look forward to visiting with you in a classified setting. While it's critical for modernizing our aviation fleet, we also need to invest in sustainment of existing systems. And you have, while you indicated a balance between New Hampshire and Maine, it's been a while since you've been to Kansas. We'd love to have you back, but while you were there, we visited Wichita State, where we saw the twinning of the B-1. Could you detail how the Air Force's work to digitally re-engineer older aircraft is important to maintaining the legacy fleet?
We have attempted to plan the full spectrum of needs where the B-21 is introduced. So that includes facilitization, simulations, training, et cetera. So I've seen programs get into trouble because there was too much focus on the platform and not enough on all the things that are necessary to support it. So hopefully we've avoided that in the case of the B-21.
Collaborative combat aircraft. The Air Force plans to rapidly acquire thousands of collaborative combat aircraft, even as the experimentation and testing of manned and unmanned teaming continues. What's the acquisition timeline, and when does the Air Force plan to conduct a fly-off?
We already have contracts underway for 5 competitors right now. We're planning to down select to a smaller number. I'm not sure exactly what that is, at least 2 though. And then move into the next phase of design for the first tranche, the first increment of the CCAs. Details beyond that get classified pretty quickly. We're also working on the technology. I'm going to get a ride in an autonomously flown F-16 later this year. There will be a pilot with me who will just be watching, as I will be, as the autonomous technology works. And hopefully neither he or I will be needed to fly the airplane. But the technology is moving forward really well, and we're encouraged by that. We set up the CCA program to have 3 separate components. One is the new development program itself. Another is the acquisition of some existing uncrewed aircraft that we could use to develop the organizational concepts and maintenance approach and so on, short out some of those non-acquisition things, and also moving the technology forward to feed into the program. And all of those are moving forward. I'm very encouraged by where the CCAs are.
Does the Air Force plan to have clean sheet designs for each mission set, or does it plan to have multiple role CCAs?
The initial role for the aircraft is going to be Conrail, but it will have the potential to do other things. So the first increment, which we're trying to get out quickly, is sort of a minimum viable product. And then the second and follow-on increments will add additional capabilities. We want to manage it very carefully, though, because we have to keep the cost under control. The intent is to keep the cost of these aircraft to a third or a quarter the cost of an F-35, say. If we don't accomplish that, they won't be as cost-effective as we desire.
Mr. Secretary, my final question. The release of the MOB 7 basing criteria for the KC-46A aircraft revealed an adjusted force structure of 8 rather than 12 aircraft. Will the unit receiving the next KC-46 units have the exact mission requirements as they did with the 12 aircraft KC-135 fleet? If so, what kind of feasibility analysis has been done to demonstrate that capability?
I don't have the details on that one ready. I'll have to take it for the record. General Alvin may be able to answer.
I would just answer, Senator, that the requirements of each of the bases really comes through our AFTRANS or Air Mobility Command to TRANSCOM. So the requirement as far as the capabilities required and the capacity required, it adjusts to the fleet size. So that we wouldn't expect that there would be a fleet's requirement that exceeds the capacity of the base with the platforms that they have.
Do we know that that capacity exists with 8 and not 12? Or we don't know that, or you're saying it doesn't exist?
Well, if the capacity is reduced because of 8 versus 12, then the requirement will be adjusted accordingly, so we won't be overstressing the crews or the maintainers to have them go up against a greater requirement for the capacity that they have.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all 3 of you for being here and for your service to our country. Secretary Kendall, we have the best intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities in the world, but I'm concerned that the drawdown of our fleets of ISR aircraft, including Global Hawk, without adequately replacing those capabilities in the Air Force is a concern. Do you believe that we have the best ISR capability now versus any of our adversaries?
Yes, overall, but we need to modernize, and we need to modernize quickly. And one of the things we're doing is shifting more capability into space, and that's largely because of the increased threats to our airborne platforms. We're acquiring systems like the E-7, which will give us an important element of this capability. We always want to present the threat with an array of problems, not just one problem. So we don't want to be totally dependent on space, and we can't be totally dependent upon airborne platforms. So we're going to have a mix in the fleet for the foreseeable future, and we're going to have a more modern set of capabilities. A lot of our existing capabilities are very useful in a benign environment and a not highly competitive environment. We want to retain them for that purpose. But we also need to get on with modernization of more survivable assets at the same time.
Right.
I'd be happy to give you a more detailed brief at classified level.
Right, and we need to do that, and you and I have talked about that. But for purpose of this briefing, so it is important that Air Force maintain that capability and that we not have a gap in terms of what our leadership in ISR now, with the idea we're going to hand it off to space and maybe have it in Space Force someday, but have a gap in either time, like a 5-year time gap, or capability, where an adversary like China might have a superior ISR capability, correct?
We're moving into space as quickly as we can. And we have funded programs right now, particularly for ground moving target capability that, again, they're highly classified. And we're moving forward on technology and programs for air moving target indication as well. Some of our older systems, like AWACS, for example, are increasingly expensive to maintain.
Right.
We've drawn them down as a way to be more efficient with the aircraft that remain. There is a transition happening there. We've reduced our MQ-9 fleet, but we've got it to a level now where we think we're going to maintain it. So we're trying to manage that and manage the risk, but we're moving aggressively to space. That's not a long way away.
Right, but you'd agree at the same time we have to maintain the best ISR capability versus any of our adversaries as we do some of that transitioning. You would agree with that?
We do need to maintain ISR capability when air as we transition. And I think you're aware, I know you've been briefed, General Alvin and I have been talking about some of the things we're doing and how we're going to take advantage of some of the programs that we can't talk about in an open hearing.
Right. And, well, my two remaining questions are, but in addition to ISR, we want to have some offensive capability as part of that as well, right? Both in terms of cyber and kinetic, right? It's not just
generally,
ISR,
yes.
right?
Yes.
It's those offensive capabilities combined with stealth. And the other thing is, are you willing to work with this committee to make sure there isn't any gap and that we're working with fixed price contracts where we know the costs versus a projected capability and a projected cost, which is likely going to be much, much higher? My question is, you're willing to work with the committee and that those things are important. That's my question.
They are important. We'll work with the committee. I don't want us to talk by each other, General Alvin, so I'm trying to be careful here. But
You know where I'm going.
I think I understand where you're coming from,
Yeah,
and
thanks.
be happy to work with you.
Okay, appreciate it. And General Saltzman, anything you want to offer on the same issue? Because you're obviously a big part of that transition.
Absolutely, and as you know, SDA is doing some work to help start to foster the kind of data transport layers, the kind of missile warning capabilities that we'll need, as well as the GMTI capabilities that we are collaborating on, as the Secretary mentioned. All of those, if they're fully funded through the program as designed, looking at later this FYDP to start to deliver some of those capabilities.
Yeah, to get the right result, we have to work very carefully with both of you to make it happen the right way. And then General Alvin, I want to thank the chairman for his emphasizing the importance of the nuclear triad and the updating of the ICBM to Sentinel and how important he thinks it is, and that I concur with that. I do as well. I also want to express my appreciation for your answer that the modernization is an absolute requirement and that we'll address Nunn-McCurdy as part of that. And I appreciate the steps you're taking to make sure that that gets done. A specific question I have for you is in regard to weapons generation facility at the Minot Air Force Base, which is the only dual nuclear base, status and your plans to address that.
Obviously, the weapons generation facilities at all of the bases are key. They're going to be important, and as we've discussed before, we need to ensure that we have those accomplished in the right order, so by the time we're ready to take on the platforms, such as B-21 and the modernized platforms, we also have the right weapons generation facilities to be able to arm those as well.
Okay. Again, thanks to all three of you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hoven. And for the information of the senators, we are going to be holding a classified hearing on Space Force-related issues. And if there's issues that need to be in that classified hearing on the Air Force, too, we're more than happy to include those. Senator Bozeman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your hard work in keeping our nation safe, but also in keeping, taking care of the men and women that serve, which is so, so very important. Along with the entire Arkansas delegation, we're pleased with the continued investment at Ebbing Air Base, making it the nation's premier foreign pilot training center for allies and partners. General Alvin, can you speak to the importance of training our allied foreign pilots on U.S. soil and why why it's imperative to our national security?
Thank you, Senator, and trust me, I say this out of pride, not arrogance, but we have the best pilots in the world. And so if you want to train, being trained by the best is good for everybody involved. But specifically, training with our airmen here in the U.S. in places like Ebbing, it offers you the opportunity to not only understand how to fly the aircraft, but how to use tactics, techniques, and procedures that are similar to those that we do as well. So as we train that with the pilots from foreign countries, their air forces develop those same tactics, techniques, and procedures, and then we can train like we're going to fight together. And so it makes us just a better allied and partner fighting force when we train on the same systems and with the same tactics, techniques, and procedures.
Very good. Secretary Kendall, you continue to emphasize the need for our investments to meet China's escalating military threats head-on. China already has more troops, more munitions, and more hypersonic weapons than we do. Their momentum is only growing. Can you talk to us how you would assess the progress you're making to keep pace with China's aggressive modernization efforts? And very importantly, what do you need most from this committee to ensure you can achieve your strategic objectives and protect America's interest at home and abroad?
Senator Boozman, the second part of your question is the easier part, timely appropriations. But thank you for asking, so I could say that. The chairman talked about it earlier, so did the vice chairman.
You can't say it enough. We appreciate that.
We have given up about a third of the time available over the last 15-odd years when we could have been making progress. We've lost 5 years in 15 years, and that you cannot win a race when you move at that kind of a pace relative to an opponent who's doesn't seem to have the same constraints. So time is my biggest concern, and timely appropriations is critical to success. I get intelligence briefs every single morning, and I've given a threat briefing to the committee. We'd like to offer another opportunity to do that, come over with an updated briefing, because the threat keeps changing. It keeps getting worse. I just saw some data this morning, which was, concerning. So we have got to move forward as quickly as we can. We're trying to structure our acquisition programs to make that happen, but I also want real capability delivered. So the guidance I've given the acquisition community is structure programs to get meaningful military capability as quickly as we can. And meaningful military capability isn't 1 or 2 prototypes. It's numbers that would matter and pose a threat to the adversary. So we're trying to structure our programs to accomplish that. We need to move forward very quickly in space. Space needs to go through a transformation. It needs to go from essentially a situation where we could operate with impunity to one where we can't. China has already fielded a number of anti-satellite capabilities and is fielding more. And China has also fielded a number of systems designed to target U.S. assets and support warfighting. And we have to deal with those. We have to have counter-space capabilities that can deal with those. And traditionally, we have not had a lot of capabilities. There are things that I can't talk about here that contribute to that, and that's very helpful, but it's not enough. We need to do more. On the Air Force side, we have this very large capital investment in the installed force, and we have this very large set of global capabilities that we're supporting. So the balance there is about doing enough for all of that, maintain that, while we get on with modernization at the same time. I have a little bit of flexibility within the Department of the Air Force to move assets between the Space Force and the Air Force. We haven't done a lot of that. I did more of the first budget that I built than the last 2. I think the risk is reasonably balanced. But time is my biggest concern. We are doing the right things. What we identified under both the operational imperatives and the subsequent work on cross-cutting operational enablers is the right suite of investments. And the $5 billion down payment that we got in the '24 budget and the $6 billion we're asking for in this budget are going to move us in the right direction. We could move faster, and I know, and I would like to be able to do that, but I think we have a reasonable pace of modernization if we're fully funded and promptly funded with the requests that we have. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. No, very much. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary General's welcome, and thank you for your leadership. Mr. Secretary, it was good to visit with you just the other day in Anchorage. I appreciate your time and the opportunity to, again, talk about one of the issues that is impacting the mission readiness capability in Alaska with this proposal from the National Guard Bureau with regards to the AGR to technicians. I appreciate you looking into that and really critically evaluating what that will mean to mission readiness. We talk a lot about the assets that the Air Force is requiring to keep pace with what is happening in the world, and we cannot overlook that none of this happens without the men and women that are operating and maintaining. I want to thank you, all three of you, for recently enacting the assignment incentive pay for extreme cold weather locations. That makes a difference in places like Minot, North Dakota, and Eielson Air Force Base. Those people are very, very appreciative for that. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to just draw your attention to a couple more areas of concern. One is this BAH situation in Eielson. You got a situation there where airmen and their families are paying anywhere between $500 and $1,000 a month for utility cost. It's a fact that the BAH there barely covers the cost of rent in the region. I just ask you to have your team look into this situation so that we're not in a place where utility costs really consume everything that these families have. So I'd like you to take a look at that. The other thing that you and I had an opportunity to speak to was the success of the flyback program that we put into place just last year. We just got this survey back. As of yesterday, I see it is good responses in the survey in terms of how many participated in it, what the impact was to the airmen who were able to take advantage of it. Basically, it's on average over $1,000 out of pocket to these individuals if they wanted to try to travel home. Nearly everyone says yes, save this program. So I'm hoping that you too see the success of this flyback program and then the individual initiatives that are going on to make it even better. Sarah Riffer with our Alaska Armed Services Y has made it a personal mission to even improve on this by being able to provide family members who are able to use the program to give them companion tickets so that their families can go home with them. So every little thing that we can make a difference, particularly in cold and darker places, are things that we would like to ensure a focus on. Let me ask a question to you, General Alvin, and this is with regards to the redesignation that we just saw up at Eielson with the 18th Aggressor Squadron redesignated as the 18th Fighter Interceptor. One of the challenges I think you recognize is we're utilizing the F-16s there. They're nearly 50 years in age, very capable. We do have the introduction of the F-15EXs, which are great modern solutions here with greater payload. My question to you is, can you share the future plan for our interceptor squadron as our F-16s continue to age out? I think you recognize, again, what a benefit this has been with this redesignation, but we do have aging aircraft.
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for that. And it has been a win-win. You know, by redesignating to the Fighter Interceptor Squadron, we have already seen improvements in the readiness of the F-22. So that fifth-generation readiness is happening, and the team is doing a fantastic job in the Fighter Interceptor Squadron. It's sort of tailor-made for that mission. To your point, though, about the aging aircraft, you know, the average F-16 is 33 years old. Understand these in Alaska are older. So we're going to continue to manage that fleet. The F-16 is the most affordable in the fighter fleet. And so for the mission of Fighter Interceptor, it really is really the ideal type of aircraft to do that at the right price point. So we'll continue to manage into the next decade to ensure that we have the right the maintenance on that, sustainability, and continue to make sure that we can maybe trade out the older ones for the newer F-16s and manage that fleet through. Because looking into the future, there may be a point in the next decade or so where we start to leverage things like collaborative combat aircraft to be able to augment on the fighter interceptor mission. So long-term, there may be a different force design for doing the fighter interceptor mission, but we will attempt to manage to ensure we have modern enough F-16s to do that job primarily because they're tailor-made for it.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I know you indicated you were going to do another round. Could I just do one more quick question for General Salzman? Thank you. General, we know that the Air Force is proposing legislation to bypass existing law requiring it to obtain a governor's consent before making changes to National Guard unit and to transfer 14 Air National Guard space units across 7 states into the Space Force. Last year, you testified that the Air National Guard makes up 30% of our nation's Space Force capacity. What we understand, this comes from a recent poll of nearly 200 ANG space operators, more than 50% said they would not transfer to the active duty Space Force. So the concern here, of course, is that you're going to have an impact on the mission, on our preparedness. It seems to me you're potentially taking on a lot of risk there. Wouldn't it be easier to transition these units and personnel to a Space National Guard? And if you disagree with that, can you explain how this proposal, your proposal, is not going to create a gap in our space capabilities?
Thanks, Senator. The missions that are currently being performed in the Air National Guard are critical to our success, and I've been very clear about that in the past. The easiest way for me to manage it, though, is for those missions to be performed in a single component. There's an added level of complexity if the Space Force is required to manage a second component like a Space National Guard. And I'm trying to do my best to keep the administrative bureaucracy, the staffing levels of the Space Force as small as possible. But in order to take care of those airmen that are currently performing space mission, I would need to have some administrative increases in order to manage 2 retirement systems, 2 promotion systems, all of the necessary overhead that comes with a second component. We were very thankful for Congress for passing the Space Force Personnel Management Act, which gave us the authorities to manage both full-time and part-time in a single component. We think this is revolutionary and is going to have a real impact on retention and career flexibility. So we're looking to take advantage of those. As far as the mission risk, here's the way I'm thinking about it. Almost every mission, in fact, every mission that is currently in the Space Force has come from another service or another military organization. And so all we've been doing for the last 4 years is managing that transition risk. Now, a lot of it came from the Air Force, and it wasn't nearly as hard because a lot of the Guardians came from the Air Force. But recently, in the last 2 years, the Army and the Navy have both given us satellite communications capabilities. The Army has given us their missile warning JTAGS capabilities. All of those missions directed to the Space Force came with no promise of personnel. So we simply had to plan and manage the risk that could be associated with it. But by deliberately planning it, managing our accessions rates, and then phasing those transitions in over time, we've been able to perform those missions seamlessly without any gaps in capability.
Mr. Chairman, I'm well over my time, but thank you.
Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you 3 gentlemen for being here with us today. General Saltzman, I'd like to start with you because we do know that space domain awareness is essential for our military operations in space. And for many operations rely on space-based assets like our satellite communications, obviously, in the non-military space. So cislunar space domain awareness has also increased in importance. How is the Space Force collaborating with private sector, academic, and interagency partners to leverage the space domain awareness arena and capabilities?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I can't emphasize this enough. Avoiding operational surprise in the space domain is one of our top priorities. The foundation of avoiding operational surprise is access to data that is collected by a number of sensors. We organically have many of those in the Space Force, but we rely on industry, commercial services, commercial data capabilities. We rely on allies, international partners. The more data you have on the space domain, the better you're able to make sense of what's going on. And so we spend money on it. We have it a part of our commercial space strategy to make sure we can incorporate that data, and we're committed to it.
Is that an increasing capability that it seems to me that would be ever expanding?
You know, it is ever expanding, and so one of the things that I'm starting to realize now is, as we increase the amount of data that we're pulling in from other sensors, we have to be able to make sense of that data. And so now we're investing heavily in decision support software, data management tools that help us rapidly pull together.
Is that AI? Is that what you're talking about there?
I don't think it even needs to rise to AI necessarily, but there are some elements of that. But it is automating certainly some of the more manpower-intensive activities that go on.
Right. Well, I understand, too, that there is some emerging cooperation between the Space Force and the Green Bank Observatory in West Virginia. So I'd like to stay in touch with you on those capabilities, and because of the radio astronomy that we have out there and have out there for decades. So excited about those possibilities. Secretary Kendall, nice to see you again. You wrote in your statement, something stuck out to me. It says the Air Force is accepting risk across the services modernization accounts in order to maintain minimally accepted near-term operational readiness. This places additional risk on the Air Force's ability to deter and defeat any adversary going forward. Obviously, what caught my eye or ear on that is the minimally accepted. Is that the standard where we are now? And I think that is a minimally accepted standard. I can't even imagine that that's actually an accepted standard, the way you phrased it. So could you explain that to me a little bit in more depth?
Thanks, Senator. The availability of our aircraft right now sits at around 60%. To me, that's a minimally acceptable number. It actually dipped a little below that. I have the most recent data here. In part driven by the fact that the V-22 fleet is still not back in the air. It's in the process of getting back in the air. But nevertheless, this is driven by a number of things. It's driven largely by supply chain, driven by availability of depot for throughput, but it's driven by money as much as anything. So we would like to be, if you may remember, General Jim Mattis, when he was secretary, tried to get all our fighter aircraft up to an 80% availability. That effort failed. The resources just weren't there to do it. So we're not where we'd like to be in terms of availability, in terms of current readiness, but it's an acceptable level because we can meet our commitments around the world. We can do the things we anticipate that the joint force may be asked to do, and as far as the air component, particularly in the space components, are concerned. We don't. The point I'm trying to make with what I said in the statement is we can't go below that. We need to stay there. And that, what happened to us in 25 in particular was that our plans were scaled back a little bit because of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We support that act. It's again acceptable to us, but we're not moving forward with modernization under it as quickly as I'd like to. We are sustaining the current fleet at a level which is acceptable. We have our foundational accounts, weapon system sustainment, the care of our facilities, our flying hours at levels which we could accept and we can live with, but long-term, they would be problematic for us. So as we look out over the next few years, we're going to have to try to do better in some of those accounts, but it's acceptable for this year, for 25. And we're moving forward with modernization at a rate which is as fast as our funding allows. And I'd like to go faster there as well. So anyway, the bottom line is that that's what's behind my statement. We had to take small cuts in procurement in order to sustain the research and development for the next generation. And again, those are on the margins and they're acceptable to us, but they're not where we would like to be.
Let me ask just a quick follow-up question on that. So I suppose when I was reading this, I was reading more on the manpower aspect of readiness as opposed to the operational readiness of the aircraft. Is that a dual problem, or is it mostly on the aircraft issue that you just explained to me?
They're all related. The availability of aircraft affects our ability to fly.
Right.
And the ability of our pilots to train. It affects what our maintenance people can do. We have, I think it's well known, a shortage in pilots right now, rated officers. And some of that is the throughput that our pilot training pipeline, if you will, can absorb. It's, and that's driven by, in part by some of our training aircraft not being as available as we'd like them to be. We just don't have the aircraft hours to train as quickly as we'd like and get as many people through. Overall, I think that and General Alvin and General Saltzman may want to comment on this, I'm less concerned about the people side of this. I think that our people are doing very well. They're getting the training that they need in general. We're talking about increasing the scale of some of our exercises to make them more realistic. And we're trying to orient our training more towards what we call the pacing challenge, the threat that China and a conflict and the conditions that people would experience in a conflict like that. That's a new requirement for us. And if we have the time, General Alvin may want to comment on that.
Okay, yes, General.
Couldn't agree with this, with Secretary more. It really is the platforms, but the platforms do drive crew proficiency, maintenance proficiency, and those sorts. So they are related. But I also, we can pick up things in the simulator and those things that can help with some of the skills. We certainly would like to have more aircraft availability to increase the proficiency of our air crews and our maintainers and the like. But I think the first thing is to get the platforms up to speed, and the air crew and maintainers will rapidly follow. But we certainly, when the Secretary talks about redoing some of our exercises, we're trying to get the most out of every flying hour that we can that gives us combat readiness for the pacing challenge.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll submit my questions to the record, except for this one. I want to ask it. General Saltzman, you talked about additional duties that were coming from other branches of the military. Your recommendation in this budget is for an end strength of about 9,800. First question is do you anticipate that you are going to get more duties, responsibilities, programs, whatever you want to call them, from either the Air Force or any other branch of service, number one? And then number two, if that's the truth, does your end strength recommendations meet that challenge? And if it isn't the truth, does your end strength numbers meet those challenges?
Thank you, Senator. We are in a period of managed growth. We are certainly getting new missions. We're developing our own missions. We're getting them from other services. The trick is I don't want the manpower before I have the actual systems to operate. We talk about counter space, the ability to hold at risk the adversary's satellites that can perform space-enabled targeting against the joint force. Those missions have yet to be realized because we're still developing the architectures to launch, to put into place. But as those get closer and closer to IOC, we'll be building the squadrons that support those and fly those capabilities. And so the trick is not asking for manpower before you need it, and then once you start to ask for it, make sure you have the training pipeline and the accessions pipeline to account for it. So I'm comfortable with the level of growth that we've asked for in this budget, and I think that's going to be a continued managed growth over the next few years.
And, excuse me, I just got to ask one more follow-up, and that is, when you're recruiting people to join the Space Force, are you recruiting people from other service branches to join the Space Force, or do you have your own recruiting folks to recruit folks out of high school or college?
So it's both right now. We are using the Department of the Air Force's Air Force Recruiting Service as a part of the recruiting for the Space Force. So we bring people straight from high school, straight from colleges for our officers on our own. But we're also still leveraging, because we need experienced people, senior people to fill out some of the staffs, once a year we ask for inter-service transfers. And so a couple of hundred a year are coming from the other services. But I suspect once we start to develop our own size at the field grade ranks, we'll need less and less of those inter-service transfers.
Okay. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Alvin, a September 2023 GAO report found that the F-35 mission-capable rate across all the variants of the F-35 was only 55%. That's far less than the program goal of 90% for the F-35A, as I'm sure you know. We know that the aircraft can sustain a much higher mission-capable rate because the Israeli Air Force has been sustaining mission-capable rates that far exceed what GAO found for the U.S. fleet last fall. Your unfunded priorities list includes $612 million for fighter force reoptimization to purchase spares and other equipment necessary to make up to 208 fighter aircraft operationally capable within the existing inventory. That strikes me as such a logical investment. I mean, if by just buying more spare parts, we can put more than 200 aircraft back into commission, why was that not included in the budget itself?
Well, thank you, Senator, because I really want to, there are really two parts to that I want to answer. First of all, to your point about increasing the mission capable rate, the Joint Program Office is working very hard in trying to look at the degraders across all three variants. And so that is really happening through the Joint Program Office. Your point about the Israelis is a very good one, because we want to make sure we learn the right lessons. They certainly are having a much higher mission capable rate. We need to see which of that is transportable, because obviously they have different sortie durations and different missions, but the point is made that they do have a very respectable mission capable rate. So the Joint Program Office is working on that from a purely mission capable. The $612 million is actually, it makes more aircraft available in this way. It's not so much that just getting more spare parts, but we're really adjusting the paradigm from how we traditionally have been deploying and having spare support for our aircraft, for our squadrons. Traditionally, you have a squadron of, in a fighter world, 24. And you have a readiness spares kit that goes with that 24 in case they need to go deploy. If you deploy 12, you still take that readiness spares kit. So now you have 12 aircraft forward, and you have 12 aircraft back at home that are sort of tethered to the home base because they don't have an additional spares kit to go somewhere else. Because a long time ago, the paradigm was those would fall in on the original in the same location. We're not doing that anymore. So we need to have the flexibility to have smaller units rather than units of 24 with a spares kit that will let them to deploy organically. So by having this $612 million, which applies to F-35, F-22, F-15, and F-16, by having those, it'll allow us to take a squadron of 24 and maybe deploy to 2 different locations and operate independently, meaning we can make more aircraft available to the combatant commander for those, for the requirements they may have, or actually the ones who aren't deploying can actually train better to do the agile combat employment and go to locations where they may have to disperse. So it's really upgrading our way of presenting forces to the combatant commands and training for the high-end challenge. So that's what that additional capability made available to combatant commanders as others, because we can deploy more smaller units rather than just having to deploy units to one location.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I want to thank the folks for their testimony here today. We are going to work very, very hard to get this budget out on time, so our hearing times are going to be very compressed. Senators may submit additional questions. I would ask that you would answer them as quickly as possible and as thoroughly as possible within a reasonable amount of time. We will convene again, hearing from the Navy on April 16th at 10 a.m. This subcommittee stands in recess. We are adjourned.